dev team, project management, testing, anything? Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. So you know from your experience, especially for high visibility launches, the room for delay and errors are pretty low. But on the contrary, the chances are pretty high because you're either working under pressure, you have too many eyes on you, and you're probably doing something for the very first time, at least part of it. So to address that, in this talk, we will audit your launch readiness, and in turn come up with a formula for delivering high quality, fast-paced, and successful software. So first thing first, who am I? I'm Nabad Adish. I'm a senior software engineer. I work for Amazon, also lead engineer for Smart Home. I have more than a decade of industry experience in healthcare, energy sector, e-commerce, and IT. I graduated from Cornell long ago, and I'm pretty passionate about designing and architecting large-scale softwares, mentoring engineers and managers. My highlight for 2018 was I led 38 high visibility software launches following the launch practices we will be discussing today. So what are some of the problems with delayed or buggy launches? Negative financial impact. So imagine your marketing team, stakeholders have been advertising for your upcoming launch, and you can't make it. It impacts the morale of the team. So imagine they've been working for days and nights, months, weeks, and in the end you're like, you can't launch. And they're like, what do you mean you can't launch? It impacts the credibility of the company, product as well, and in some cases the individuals as well. So it puts you in a bad light, and it derails your future roadmap and other dependencies. So to make things a little bit interesting, let's gamify. Let's imagine you are part of the dev team who's about to launch a product. I, on the other hand, am an auditor who will be auditing for your upcoming launch. In turn, I will be asking you a bunch of questions to evaluate your launch readiness. These questions can be extended or adapted for your use case. With these questions, I will also be giving you a perspective of what you think when answering them, and also we will talk about a few best practices. Due to time constraint, before we dive into the causes and the solution, let's define the boundary of the problem. So making an assumption here, that skill set is not an issue on your team. So let's imagine your dev team comprises of at least some experienced developers and managers. Our assumption 2 is there is a clarity of vision and everyone is working towards a common goal. And assumption 3 is you're closer to the launch, at least from the perspective of this presentation. Even for a seasoned team of engineers and managers, you can see the causes on the screen that are related to delayed launches or unaddressed bugs, attributed to the scale, lack of in-depth testing, not ready for international launches, security aspect is big, and simply forgetting to estimate a test. So, agreed to start with, right? Okay. So remember I mentioned as a part of the audit, I will be asking you a bunch of questions to evaluate your readiness for the launch. So what are some of the criteria of the question? We'll make sure the questions, they span from dev phase to testing to launch phases of SDLC. These are essentially a checklist of tasks. With each question, we will be validating your launch readiness. Each question we'll make sure will have a binary answer to it, so a yes or a no. Why? Because then it becomes easier for project management to trace. Optional but highly recommended, have a risk number associated with each question, so you can identify what are the most crucial questions for the launch. And then optional, also recommended, have a status flag associated with questions. So for instance, green means the answer or your work is in progress and you're on track for the launch. Yellow, on the other hand, is it's in progress but it has a potential risk for the launch. Red clearly mentions that it is a risk to the launch and it needs an immediate attention, and so on. So, are you ready for the questions then? Okay. So, first one is, do you have an on-call setup ready? So when you answer this question, at the very minimum, no, if you have a support staff identified. You can think of them as launch shepherds. A lot of companies prefer keeping their dev team as part of the on-call rotation for obvious reasons, right? Because they've been working on the product, they've been coding and stuff. So identify a strategy to escalate an issue which is not being addressed. Triaging of critical issues is a great idea. So separate them from non-critical, and if it can be automated, it's even better. For the best practices, look at the customer impacting issues first. But please be sensitive to support staff's fatigue, because in turn, they're probably part of your team, dev team, or support team as well. It's a good idea to have a control launch. If you can control the different components of the launch separately, that's even better. Break up your release into smaller releases if possible, and plan the order of deployment. For instance, for UX feature, deploy the assets first, and then the service code, and then finally the client template. And keep your launch shepherds informed of the state of the things all the time. So especially if you're launch shepherd, runbooks are your true friend, right? So the next one is, do you have an emergency runbook? So what is a runbook? It's essentially an organized SOPs, standard operating procedures. So with that, you can react to events, you'll know how to enable disaster recovery, they will contain steps for everyday processes, and you can do new system installations. Now why are they great? Because you're enabling having a succession plan, and it offloads dependencies on a single person. So for best practices, in your runbook, you should always list out POC, that's the point of contact. You should have an escalation route if some issue needs traction, and keep updating it, because because if it's outdated, then it's of no use. And it's best to get it reviewed regularly by someone senior, and if possible, external to the dev team. So now let's imagine you have an on-call setup, and you have a runbook. To assess the health of the system, where would you go? So dashboards, right? So the next one is obviously, do you have useful dashboards? So this is a Christmas tree-like representation of dashboards. What I'm trying to imply with this one is at the level 1, that's the root, try to have an overall metrics to measure the overall health of the system. Overall traffic, overall latency of the entire system. Now if you want to drill down further, on the level 2, you have the API and component level metrics, such as the request rates, fault rates, etc. And if you want to drill down further, below you have the level 3, that's the host level metrics. So it's host level CPU utilization, heartbeat, memory usage, and so on. For best practices, create dashboards by launch regions, and try to group related monitors. Monitors are particularly great for gathering data against unhealthy systems. So the next question obviously is, do you have monitors set up? So your monitors should be set up to measure whether the service, the feature, or simply piece of code is working as expected under variant conditions. Some of the examples of the monitors could be service or API level monitoring. These are some of the examples of that. And you could also have infrastructure level monitoring. These are some of the other examples of that. So regardless of which monitor you have, the best implementation of a monitor is when you have a threshold defined on the monitor that will trigger an alarm in case of anomaly. So that brings us to, do you have the alarm set? These are great for notifying developers or support engineers in case of anomaly. Like we discussed, alarms are triggered when monitors exceed the threshold. For best practice, make sure that do not classify every single alarm to be classified as critical, right? Because if everything is critical, nothing is critical. It is important to have region-based alarms. The table calls out the recommended correlation between the monitors and threshold for cloud-based services. So I'll let you read this for a minute because it's actually important. So how do you read it? Is For metrics on dependency throttling or AWS throttling, have the alarm on 1 minute metrics for one data point. That means alarm if over threshold for 1 minute. For metrics on false, failures, error rates, alarm on 1 minute metrics for 5 data points. What it simply means is alarm if over threshold for 5 minutes. And similarly for latency, you want alarm if over threshold for 15 minutes. So these are some of the examples of some of the alarms you can have. You obviously can have more than these, but all right. So alarms, monitors, and even debugging feed on logs, right? So the next obvious question is, are you logging the right information? And the reverse is also true, that are you logging the information right? So you're focusing on the format as well. So it's essential for debugging, gathering relevant data, and also triggering monitors, right? For best practice, log the correct level of logging, right? So info, warning, error, critical. Set logging appropriately for each deployment phase. Create events that are human readable, because if you can't read it, what's the point of having the logs? Use timestamps, because they are very helpful to go back and look back in time. Use developer-friendly formats like JSON and so on. Make sure to not log everything. Use caution, because they will fill up your code. So also have a cleaning mechanism for your logs. And it's very important, it's very commonly ignored, is do not save sensitive information on logs, because they're very easy to hack into. So one of the most important and commonly ignored questions for high visibility launches are you prepared for the traffic? And most of the times they're not. So for the best practice, make sure you have a strategy to estimate the traffic and scale and descale your service. Definitely do perform testing and be aware of your peak. Be prepared and aware of marketing strategies or holidays or events that could impact your service, your product. Ability to scale your infrastructure automatically is great investment on returns. Most importantly, make sure your downstream and upstream dependencies are always informed. And when you go down, make sure they do not go down with you. So have a mechanism to have a circuit breakers to shut the loop. For this question, let me start by asking, I imagine you all have been to IKEA, right? So did you know IKEA's instruction manuals are the best example of launching in different regions with 0 additional changes? Do you know how? That's your example right there. The manual just comprises of images. Now how smart is that? So lesson to be learned, be able to launch your software in different locales without major architectural changes. Say no to hard-coded strings, especially customer-facing. Avoid text and images, because then you'll have to have that many number of images, right, in different languages. Use utilities for price, currency, times, and dates, and have capabilities to scale in international regions, apart and separately from US. So this is actually a very big question. So what it implies is you have to know the software limitations of your own product. So keep security in mind from the beginning always. Be aware of security risks that could cause issues to your launch. It's a good idea to get it reviewed by someone external. So an architectural review by someone external is great. Definitely do some security and penetrating testing. And this is one of the mechanisms that people use. So develop a threat model against your software, identify a mitigation plan, and mitigate the threat. And then loop over till everything is resolved. So the next one is, were any launch blockers found during your bug bash? So bug bash is a great process for identifying if there is any issue with your product. So everyone from your team, be it developers, testers, program managers, everyone get together and they try to bash the product and try to find out bugs. It is performed prior to the launch, and it's done in addition to unit tests and integration tests. So this is a mechanism of how you perform a bug bash. If you find bugs, triage them. Out of the triaged issue, if you're identifying launch blockers, then inform the stakeholders, block the launch, and work on resolving the issue. Once resolved, you may do a full-fledged bug bash again, or simply review the issue and then proceed. At the end of the bug bash, your stakeholders and you, especially the dev team, should have a decision on if it's a go or a no-go for the launch. It's very important to have a rollback plan. So the next obvious question is, do you have a rollback plan? At times, rollback is also not an option, so have a plan accordingly. Be prepared for the worst case scenario. Have a rollback strategy, automated, practiced, simple, and reliable. Blue to green deployment strategies are great. Have you heard of those? It's essentially a capability to execute either the newly deployed code, shown in green, or revert the color. So if you don't want to execute the newly deployed code, then you would revert to the older code. Database rollbacks are tough, so if possible, do it isolated. Let's look at some of the implementation. So the content is important, right? You can implement it in a wiki, spreadsheet, make a tool. This is one of the implementation of the solution. We have listed the question that we discussed. Each have an answer and the status as we discussed. Red, remember it was the risk of the launch and it required immediate attention. For the example, I've given equal weight to every single question. So you can see this being S1. So aggregating the formula, imagine this was your launch readiness. So overall risk is going to be red because red escalates. If the answer of any question is red, then that becomes your overall status. Overall launch readiness percentage is 50% because see the answers are actually 6 of them are yes out of the 12, so it becomes 50%. Now that's not great, but now you can engage your stakeholders, make informed decisions to address the issue. And hopefully it will lead to lesser last-minute rocky launches. So let's sum up with the benefits. So why is it good? Because it's a checklist of trackable items that we're creating, from dev phase to testing and launch phases. Forgetting to estimate is not an option anymore. It's helpful to list out best practices, even tasks for newer members. From the project management side, you're giving a common platform for the developers, the project management team, and the stakeholders to review. It's a clear picture of state of things, and it's great for resource management. And it's good for audit history because you're documenting the steps taken towards the launch and can be used for posterity and retrospect. All right, wish you a happy launch in the future.